All right, the time is 8 o'clock. I'm going to give some people just a moment to log in. While we're waiting for people to log in, if you'd like to share where you're from, where you're watching from today, that would be great. Candles always likes to get an idea of where our community is located. And of course, we want to see where everybody's at tonight. And with this event being virtual, we're of course able to reach a much wider audience than if we were in person in Terre Haute. So thank you all for being here, and we'll give it just a moment before we begin. All right, I think I'm gonna go ahead and start now, and we may have some extra people come in here, but if that's the case, they can pick up where we are. So thank you all for joining us for tonight's event. This presentation will be recorded and available on our website for anyone who would like to share it or review it at a later date. If you have any questions at any time during the presentation, please use the Q&A tab on the Zoom window, and we will save time at the end of the presentation to answer your questions. The Pittsburgh Synagogue shooting was an anti-Semitic terrorist attack that took place at the Tree of Life building in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The Or La Simcha congregation, along with New Light congregation and Congregation Dor Hadash, which all worshipped in the Tree of Life building, were attacked during Shabbat morning services on October 27th, 2018. The perpetrator killed 11 people and wounded 6, including several Holocaust survivors. It was the deadliest attack on the Jewish community in the United States. I would like to welcome Dr. Lauren Bairnsfather. She is the founder of LAB Historical Consulting, served as the executive director of the Pittsburgh Holocaust Museum from 2015 to 2023, and was a key figure in the early efforts to rebuild Tree of Life. Tonight, she will share her thoughts and account of the Pittsburgh Synagogue shooting as we approach the 5-year anniversary, which is tomorrow, October 27th. Thank you, Dr. Bairnsfather, for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Trent. Hello, everyone. We have what we call a cozy crowd, and I want to thank everybody who is in the audience of this webinar. As you just heard, tomorrow is the 5-year anniversary of the attack on the Tree of Life, and it's weighing heavily. So I'll give you a little bit of an overview of what I'm going to do in this presentation. But first, I want to thank the team at Candles for inviting me to speak on this topic this evening. Alex Core, Troy, and Trent, thank you so much. I also want to thank Susan Myers, chair of the Association of Holocaust Organizations, who introduced me to Alex Core, and that was the beginning of my friendship with Candles, and I'm just honored to be with you this evening to talk about what is a very difficult subject and at a difficult time. So, as you heard, I'm Lauren Bairnsfather. Until February, this past February, I was the executive director of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, and I was a frontline community leader in the aftermath of the synagogue shooting. So I wonder if any of you, and we have, as I said, a cozy crowd, if any of you have been to Pittsburgh, and we're not terribly far away from you, I guess about a 7-hour drive. And we're also known as the Paris of the Appalachians. So if you haven't been here, I encourage you to visit. It's a wonderful place, which is part of why it was so shocking that this horrific thing happened 5 years ago. And what I'm going to do this evening is I've divided my talk into 2 parts. And truly, I've talked about this many, many times, but for this evening, I have a different presentation. So I've divided it into 2 parts, as I said. The first part is a slideshow that really is a slideshow, like old school, it's pictures. Doesn't have words. I'm going to talk you through them. I'm going to show you what we experienced just before, on the day of the shooting, and in the years that followed. I'm going to mention documentary called Stories from the Tree of Life, which some of you may have seen on PBS. I know it aired yesterday and today. If you did not see it on your local PBS channel, it's available on PBS Online. Not in Our Town is a nonprofit organization that makes films documenting communities that stand up to hate. And I see this film really as a love letter to Pittsburgh. And it's really good. It really tells you about what happened, what was the context of the shooting, what came before, how we can understand what happened. It has real explanatory power. And it celebrates the many Pittsburghers from outside of the Jewish community who showed up for their Jewish neighbors. And that makes it very special. So if you haven't seen it and you have a chance to, I encourage you to do so. And I'm going to refer to it a little bit really in the second part of my talk. The second part of my talk is the reflection on Tree of Life that you've been promised. And that part is the hardest part, mainly because of what's happening in the world right now. So I'm going to take the opportunity to be vulnerable with all of you and admit that it's a very painful time here, and it has brought back all of the feelings of October 27th, 2018. And I know that I'm not alone in really struggling these last few weeks. One thing that I found is that being together helps. So again, thank you for being together this evening virtually. But so that we can at least share our thoughts. And I'm going to invite you to be involved in the work to counter hate, which is more important than ever. So for part one, I'm going to share my screen. So let me set that up. Okay, is everyone seeing that? Can I get a thumbs up from my candles people behind the scenes? Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. So I want to begin the presentation with the exhibition that was displayed at the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh that really opened in October of 2018. And it's beautiful. And some of you may have had an opportunity to see it. It comes from the Milwaukee Jewish Museum. Okay. And it's called Stitching History from the Holocaust. And what you're seeing is this incredible display of clothing that was designed by a woman in Prague who was trying to get someone to sponsor her and her husband so that they could come to the United States. And she had this incredible eye and was really forward thinking. So these dress designs sat in a drawer at the Milwaukee Jewish Museum for a long time, and then they were discovered. And they decided to make the clothes. So it was a traveling exhibit, absolutely gorgeous. As you can see, it's these murals on the walls that make it look like you're on a street in Prague. And so we were surrounded by this beauty on this very ugly day. And I'm going to be careful not to touch too many things because then I'll confuse my slides. So on the morning of October 27th, 2018, I was at home. I was not at a synagogue. And the first message I got was from a friend from home, and home is the Pittsburgh area, who lives out of town. And it was a message that said, active shooter at the Tree of Life. And not 10 seconds later, my phone rang, and it was my younger sister. And she said, "Where are you?" And I said, "Oh, I'm home." But it was reasonable that I might have been at the Tree of Life building that day, because as head of the Holocaust Center, I was often invited to go to services, to Shabbat services, and I would go. I went pretty regularly. I was not there that day. Many people I know were there. I did know some of the victims. And the whole town was just suspended in terror, just waiting, because it took a long time. It was an active shooter situation for quite a while. So backing up a bit, in January of 2018, the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh began to make plans with the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. We were doing a year of programming about women, thus our beautiful exhibit of dresses. And we were bringing a Holocaust survivor from Chicago. And we were also bringing the new technology, the hologram, not so new anymore, right? New dimensions and testimony. And I know that you participated in that. So we were so excited. We'd been planning it forever. And that morning, Holocaust survivor Magda Brown of blessed memory was sitting at O'Hare Airport with her daughter, Rochelle. And I hadn't met either of them. And Rochelle called me and she said, I'm watching the news and I see what's happening in Pittsburgh. Mom doesn't know, and I have to tell her. And I said, of course. And she said, I don't know if we'll be able to come. And I said, well, I don't know what's going to happen. None of us knows. I hope that you'll come, but of course I'll understand if you don't. And I hung up the phone. Not 10 minutes later, Rochelle called back and she said, Mom says it's more important than ever. Let's go. And Magda Brown walked onto that airplane, flying toward a city where she knows there's an active shooter situation at a synagogue. So I know that Magda really got around. So it's possible that some of you on this call knew Magda and loved her perhaps as I did. But I have to tell you that having her and Rochelle in town that weekend made all the difference for everybody at the Holocaust Center. So on the day of the shooting, I now know that they're in the air, right? And I'm fielding phone calls from so many people from all over the world. They see what's happening. And I'm going to the airport. I have to pick up Magda and Rochelle. So I thought, how will they recognize me? They've never met me. So I sent Rochelle a picture. I texted her a picture of me. Now you'll recognize me. So they get off of the elevator and Rochelle's face lights up. They come straight toward me. And as we're driving toward the city, we heard a ding that Rochelle had gotten a message, and it was the message with my picture. So she hadn't ever seen a picture of me. It was just like we had an immediate pull toward each other. And I would say that that was the feeling, and it's still the feeling that we have toward each other. We became instant family that day. So now they were in Pittsburgh, right? And the plan was that Magda was going to speak the next day at Chatham University, which, if you're familiar with Pittsburgh and with the Squirrel Hill neighborhood, it's a walkable neighborhood. And the campus of Chatham University is across the street from the Tree of Life Synagogue building. Okay. So on campus now, they have the FBI set up there. All kinds of things are happening related to the shooting. And there's some worry that having an event with the Holocaust Center is not a good idea the next day. And this was reasonable worry. There's fear of a copycat, as always happens when there are these terrible events. So throughout that afternoon and later into the night, I was on the phone with my incredible friend, Jessie Ramey, who's a professor at Chatham and was co-sponsoring this event. She was working for hours, along with the president of the university's wife, who was in town, also working on things, Sue Feingold. And finally, they agree. They're still going to have the event for us. They move the location to a larger facility where they can check people as they come into the door. So very busy day, needless to say. Well, we're all still in somewhat of a state of shock. So you'll probably be familiar, definitely, with the facade of the Tree of Life building, which is fairly famous by now, and with the Stars of David that were put up in memory of the 11 victims. So here is Magda speaking at Chatham University, and we really packed a room. You'll see that there are some empty seats, but very few in my next picture. We had about 400 people. And because of the location, people who were home and didn't feel well and didn't really want to do something big, because, a climate of fear spreads through the space when something like this happens. We had so many people who could just walk to where we were, and then they were able to participate. And this is what it looks like. And I can see that I'm missing a slide that should be here, which is not unlike the two that you've seen, except for that it's a backstage shot of Magda, who was on the front page of the Washington Post for coming to speak in Pittsburgh when she knew that there was a shooting situation here. So, she is a hero. She was a hero. I feel like many of the things that I've accomplished since that day, I can thank her. I have felt for these years like she's looking over my shoulder and whispering in my ear, let's go. Let's go. Don't let anything stop you, right? Not a week later or 2 weeks later, we had an event downtown. We had the Children of Williston Lane, another packed house, with Rabbi Myers of the Tree of Life in the audience. And he spoke beautifully about community and togetherness and friendship and love versus hate. He doesn't even like to use that word. He calls it the H word. And this was just another example of how the community was showing up. Everybody is showing up for the Jewish community, right? And so I will again refer you to that amazing documentary that really chronicles how the community showed up for the Jews. And I thought that never happened in history. I mean, I'm a Holocaust education expert, Holocaust museums and memory. When have we heard a story like this? And it still gives me hope. And I'll say more about that a little bit later. Part of the daring that overcame me after Magda flew to Pittsburgh on that terrible day, we've been thinking about taking on harder issues and the connections between anti-Semitism and racism and other forms of discrimination against minorities. And I have a very good friend. His name is Ime Eloquiva. And remember that name because he'll be winning Academy Awards and who knows what else. He's already won Emmys for his video work. But he has a series of exhibits called Optic Voices. And we came together, and the board of the Holocaust Center really appreciated this idea. We did an exhibit called Optic Voices Roots. And that's the next slide. So this exhibit featured photographs that Ime took on his trips to Europe. He was in Poland and he documented what the concentration camps look like. And he puts up those pictures. No captions, no titles of these photographs. And the visitors are invited to come up with their own captions and to take from each photograph what they will. And we had this exhibit. We opened it in July. It was supposed to be up for a couple of months, and we kept it up until the end of November because the response was so powerful. And you can see some of the visitors here. It often looked crowded like this. This is one of the photographs from the exhibit. And I love to show this because this became a mural in Pittsburgh during the pandemic. Someone made a massive mural size of this image. Really beautiful and evocative. And here's a group picture, and I included this so that you can see the artist. He is the tall gentleman in the back wearing a hat. And he is like a brother to me, just a wonderful close friend. One of the people who called me after October 7th, after the Hamas invasion and murder of 1,400 people, he called me and he said, "What can I do? What do you need?" You know, that kind of friend. Another great friend of mine since October 27th, 2018 is Rabbi Jeffrey Myers from the Tree of Life. And some of you may have seen Rabbi Myers on CNN or have read about him. I mean, he's fairly well known at this point. He is another hero. And this photograph is at the end of the exhibit. In remembrance, there is life. And this photograph has taken on a life of its own. It's in other exhibits. It has an interactive video component from a recent Optic Voices iteration, which is called Optic Voices Mama's Boys. Should it come to any town near you, I highly recommend that you see it. And this message, I mean, what a strong and powerful message in the face of everything that had happened. So in addition to hosting Optic Voices Roots at the Holocaust Center space, we were able to work with the University of Pittsburgh to bring the Lest We Forget exhibit to the Pitt campus. So and Pittsburgh does not really have a city center. So, you know, cities have brought the Lest We Forget exhibit and put it right in the middle of their cities. And this exhibit is the work of the photographer Luigi Toscano, also now a very good friend of mine. He's based in Germany. The exhibit has been all over Europe. It's been in a few cities in the United States, larger cities than Pittsburgh, but I did not hesitate to reach out to him and see if he would come to Pittsburgh with the exhibit. Each place he goes, he photographs Holocaust survivors, and the exhibit is enormous, like 8 foot tall, close-ups of Holocaust survivors, and it's always put up outside. So this is what it looked like at Pitt, and you can see some of the images here. I have a better one next that you can really see what they look like. But what was so amazing about this is a very busy thoroughfare. I mean, we think 150,000 people saw this exhibit in the month that it was up. So many people walk through this space. And I went there almost every day. And what happened is, you know, people would be jogging across this lawn and stop in their tracks so they could see what this exhibit was. And here's a close-up. Here I am at the opening with Moshe Baron. Moshe was a partisan in Belarus, and he's 102 years old. Just really a wise and wonderful person. And I mean, you can see from the look on my face how I felt about him and how I feel about him. So this was an incredible way to honor our Holocaust survivors, and we relied on their strength. You know, they were incredible after the shooting. And I want to make one just very small correction to the introduction. There were not any Holocaust survivors in the building that day. There were not any Holocaust survivors who were victims that day. One survivor, Judah Samet, also of blessed memory, was in the parking lot. So he was sent away. So he didn't go into the building. There was reporting that one of the victims was a Holocaust survivor. And I worked pretty hard to dispel that information when it got out, but it had a life of its own. So some people still say that. They're talking about Rose Mallinger, whose family I've become close with. She was 97 years old. And maybe because of her age, this rumor spread that she was a Holocaust survivor, but in fact, she was born in the Pittsburgh area and she was not a Holocaust survivor. I feel like these things matter. I mean, as we see the manipulation of fact and images and the spread of misinformation, I like to get as close to the truth as I can. So we had a lot of prominent visits to this exhibit, and it was up at the time of the 1-year commemoration, which is hard to believe it was that long ago already. But on that day, we had a visit from then Governor Tom Wolf, and behind him to the right is our now Governor Josh Shapiro. So I got to take some prominent people through the exhibit, and it was incredibly meaningful. I mean, everyone who saw it just could not believe it. And here I am with the photographer. That's Luigi Toscano, and it's a photograph of Francine Galerner, also of blessed memory. So, I mean, we were able to capture these photographs of a number of survivors who are no longer with us. So it really was a wonderful thing for our city and for the work of the Holocaust Center, and a really nice thing we could do for them. So shortly after this, so this is now up until November of 2019, I heard from Luigi that the exhibit was going in at the United Nations in Geneva. And Pittsburgh survivors were front and center, and I got to go. So this is, you actually see 3 Pittsburgh survivors in this photograph. And in the front is Sam Gottesman, who was one of the most wonderful people I have ever known in my life. And I will refer to him again later. But this was a person who could talk to anyone and make everyone feel seen and heard and loved. And he was wonderful. And he died even before the exhibit opened. So there are many pictures of people just in tears near the photograph of him, but that he participated was very meaningful. And then behind him is Yolanda Willis, and behind her, Irene Schulman. So this is in front of the United Nations in Geneva, Pittsburgh Holocaust survivors. And Magda was also there. Pardon the blurriness of that photo. So during this time, the Not in Our Town team immediately began to document what was happening. And this is captured in the film Repairing the World: Stories from the Tree of Life. And I appear in the film. So my role in the film is very specific. I am there to explain, like, what is the connection between historic anti-Semitism, the Holocaust, what happened at the Tree of Life. And I'll say a little bit more about what my role in the film is later. But it was incredible that I got to be included in it. And also included in the film is a clip from probably my favorite thing that we did in response. And it was a program that actually was the idea of a former Pittsburgh Steeler. And I say former with sadness in my heart, because this is one of the most wonderful people I've ever met, Zach Banner. And Zach Banner had the idea to get a group of athletes together. And this should resonate because you all do an Athletes Against Anti-Semitism program too. And we called it Athletes Against Anti-Semitism. It was a Zoom conversation, and we did it a couple of times. This was the poster. And you can see who some of the athletes are. Alicia Clark just won a championship in the WNBA just this past week. And what was really striking about this, and I'll come back to this in part 2 of my presentation, is that Zach insisted on having Jasiri X, who, I'm on the end, and then Rabbi Myers, and then Jasiri in the middle. Jasiri is a really important community leader in Pittsburgh. And long ago, he was the head of the Nation of Islam in this area. So in the day that this program was happening, word got out that we had Jasiri on the panel, and it's a program against anti-Semitism. And we were all attacked online, like a brutal attack on Twitter. I just turned it off. A number of people asked, would I consider canceling this event? This is, you can't do it. You can't, it's a joke that you have this guy on the panel. And I knew him by this point. I called him. I said, I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to ask you about this. We want to go on with this program, but I'm going to have to ask you. And in the event, Jasiri apologized. He apologized for the pain that he had caused to the Jewish community. And that made everyone who had attacked us come out on social media and say, he apologized, so then it's great. But to me, the most important thing that came out in that conversation is he explains what the appeal of that movement was when he was younger and why he got involved in that in the first place. And that kind of honest conversation where someone is vulnerable and is showing that they trust you. And this is a program, we're online with, I think we had a couple thousand people. That's what was really amazing to me. And Jasiri is one of the people who has been handling the current situation in a very respectful way, and remains a friend of mine. So I know that it's possible. And in the last couple of weeks, when I know a lot of people have seen their friendships fracture and they're really heartbroken about how some people have treated them and how people they thought were their friends aren't showing up for them, I've had the opposite kind of experience. And I fear that that may come from being in a community that experienced a hate crime. That we know what that is and we know how it feels. So just for a touch of comic relief, if you'll bear with me, I worked with Zach Banner, so he's on the end on the left in this picture. I worked with him on Zoom for a couple of years before I got to meet him in person. So this is our comic relief. Okay, so there I am with Zach Banner. Now, bear in mind, I am a normal-sized human being. I'm probably average size for a woman. So do with that what you will, but this picture gives me so much pleasure. It's so funny. So I've talked about the film. There's a clip from our Athletes Against Anti-Semitism program in the film, and there are also some stills from the community that I think are really lovely, including this, Disarm Hate. And finally, this photo. And I feel like some of the solidarity that we saw, that is not what's happening right now, is it? But it's so very important. It's so very important that we don't let propaganda and lies divide us. So I'm going to turn to my reflections in one moment, but I want to conclude with this slide, and I want to read the names of the victims of October 27th, 2018. May their memories be for a blessing. Certainly, much good work has been done in their memories in the last 5 years. Joyce Feinberg, Richard Gottfried, Rose Mallinger, Jerry Rabinowitz, Cecil Rosenthal, David Rosenthal, Bernice Simon, Sylvan Simon, Daniel Stein, Melvin Wax, and Irving Younger. Okay, so I'm back, and I want to reflect a little bit. And I also want to remind you all that you can put questions into the Q&A, and I welcome you to do that because the conversation is always the best part of any program like this. And I want to hear from you and I want to talk to you. So we've mentioned the film repeatedly, and I mentioned that my role is to connect the dots between historical anti-Semitism and the attack on the Tree of Life, and where we are now. That was another piece. And where we are now, I would say something different now, because as we've seen over the past few weeks, we're somewhere different. And during the film, and this is important, especially because I'm speaking for Candles, I make a tough criticism of Holocaust education. And that's because I saw firsthand that teachers and students all over the Pittsburgh region were absolutely shocked that something like that could have happened. Many of them really invested in Holocaust education still, and it's not their fault, and it's not that the teachers weren't doing a good job, they were. The way that we taught about the Holocaust, and often by necessity, because a teacher maybe had, 1 week, began in 1933 and ended in 1945, leaving many people with the impression that anti-Semitism began and ended with the Holocaust, right? And of course, we know that that is not true. And as I'm speaking to you now, in the context of war in Israel, I'm troubled, truly troubled, by thoughts of the other ways we might have expanded the scope of Holocaust education to build a better understanding of the factual connections between the Holocaust and Israel, right? Which are not what most people believe them to be. And I'm talking about propaganda. There's a line in the film I've been talking about where the head of the Jewish Federation says that there's anti-Semitism on the right and on the left. And we know that to be true, but wow, the last few weeks we're really seeing how anti-Semitism functions on the left, when in the case of the attack on the Tree of Life building, we really thought of that as more of a right-wing kind of movement, right? So we're already seeing both right now in 2023, October of 2023. And I just want to make a small note here that I think I mentioned in my introduction, but when I teach my Holocaust course, my university course, I always let the students know that I'm going to sound really calm when I'm talking about these things, but it's not how I feel. And I know that I mentioned I was going to be vulnerable with you. I'm deeply disturbed by what's happening now. I am upset on the inside. I am definitely in pain, as I'm sure that many of you in the audience are in pain, worried about friends and relatives in Israel, and wondering if Jews are safe in the world in 2023. You probably have other global concerns now. Maybe you're concerned about the other news that we're seeing from Gaza. Regardless of what is making you worry right now, I feel like most of us are really unsettled by what we've seen in the world over the past 3 weeks. I was asked earlier today to explain how it feels to be questioned by our friends about Israel's culpability for the attack on October 7th. To watch as anti-Zionism shows itself to be anti-Semitism. And it's coming from people who we saw as dear friends, right? And I mentioned this. These were our dear friends and partners in the effort to end hate. Right? What the film does is really, really helps to understand the Great Replacement theory. It shows the Unite the Right rally, the Jews will not replace us, all of those things. And it does lend some understanding to what happened. And I know a lot about the efforts to work with all of these online communities, right? Pittsburgh hosts an incredible meeting, the Eradicate Hate Global Summit, which will be in October next year, which brings together these experts from all over the world who really know how to disarm hate through technology. We're seeing something really different over the last 3 weeks. And, a future program, you might bring in someone who can really explain what's happened and how this propaganda has spread so widely. And, what technology has made that possible, right? But we don't need that to understand the danger of propaganda, right? The danger of dehumanization, the history of Jews being scapegoated for everything that goes wrong in the world for thousands of years. We understand that. The idea of the blood libel, we understand that from Jewish history. And it is quite painful to hear the echoes of that history now. Looking back to October 27th of 2018, the Jewish community in the Pittsburgh area, there was a split between people who wanted to be with the community and out in the street, and students organized an incredible event that very night in Squirrel Hill on the busiest corner. And I think about 1,000 people came, but there were just as many people who didn't want to go anywhere, didn't want to see anyone. And I feel like some of us have that luxury now after the pandemic, working from home. You really can confine your life to your home if you want to. But at that time, that really didn't feel possible. And I want to acknowledge that, because I think a lot of people are going through those feelings now, wondering, is it safe? Can I be safe? Am I safe as a Jewish person? And I mean, we've seen attacks on Muslims too. Are people safe as Muslim people in this country? And I just regret deeply that we have to think about any of this now, but unfortunately we do. So I just want to close, because I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A, but I want to close by acknowledging the importance of candles, and that all of you also survived an arson attack on your museum. And so you know what it is to survive an attack like that, and to rebuild and to come back strong, which you surely did. And I have to talk about the example that Ava Kor set. And oh, I wish I'd had a chance to meet her. I can't even tell you how much I wish I'd had a chance to meet her. But I know that her example brought so many people strength. And while it was controversial, that she recommended forgiveness and that was so important to her, I recognize in that, an interest in healing and understanding what it means to heal. And I know that she was a wonderful woman, and I'm inspired by her as I talk to all of you today. So I'm going to close now. I want to say a little bit about resilience, where I just was, right, talking about resilience. One thing that I did as a community leader in the aftermath of the Tree of Life was I put one foot in front of the other. And I don't think I really interacted I was in a fog of just get this done, just show up for people, make sure you open your doors, make sure you have this event. And I was really proud of that. Right? And we all had shirts that said "Stronger Than Hate." And I proudly wore my "Stronger Than Hate" shirt. And then later, and not that long ago, I began to reflect on what that really meant, and what it means if we expect ourselves always to be strong in the face of hate. And I began to feel a little bit angry that any of us has to think like that, or that any of us has to do that. We should be able to live our lives, and we should be able to live them without fearing that violence is coming for us. So I deeply regret what's happening around us. There were all of those shootings that happened in Maine last night. Each time these things happen, it triggers the trauma. The trauma comes back. This week, with the 5-year anniversary of the Tree of Life shooting tomorrow, it's been really difficult. And I appreciate anyone who is willing to acknowledge that. That is the only way we really can heal. I mean, I understand forgiveness is an important part of this, and there were some survivors from the day of the shooting who also really believe that. And I think it's really important, and I can see why. I can see why some people feel that way. But I do ask you and encourage you, please, to watch this film, because it's really a call to action. It is a film about the community coming together. And as I've seen over the past 3 weeks, those relationships are real, because those are the people calling me to ask me how I'm doing. And in other places, I see people calling out their Jewish friends and blaming their Jewish friends for what's happening in Israel. And it just shouldn't be that way. And so for people who want to see something different, I thank you for that. And I hope that we all will work toward a safer future for everyone. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Dr. Bairnsfather. As you mentioned, please, to our audience, if you have questions, post them in the Q&A section. I do have a question for you. I'll start with the Q&A. What is the role of Holocaust museums in bringing awareness to mass shootings here in the United States, especially those that are targeting the Jewish communities? What should Holocaust museums be doing to bring our communities together and bring awareness to these things?
So I absolutely love this question, and it gives me a chance to talk about a hot moment, a heated moment at the Association of Holocaust Organizations annual meeting. The first one I attended after the shooting was in January of 2019, and they have a directors meeting. So we're all together, and that very question came up because everyone is trying to figure out what is our role at Holocaust museums now that this thing happened, the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in the United States. And one person said, we don't do that. We stay in our lane. And I had a strong response to that. I had a really strong response to that. Although, I mean, in retrospect, I understand. It makes sense. You have your scope. You do what you're supposed to do. So not every Holocaust museum sees itself as having a role in responding to these things. But I felt like we could do more to teach about historic anti-Semitism. We could do more to teach about anti-Semitism now. We could do a better job. So that's what I said. And after the shooting at the synagogue, I had a larger platform, right? Like more people were listening to what I had to say. So you better believe I was talking about that. And that became something that was really at the core of what we were doing at the Holocaust Center. And even the exhibit that the Holocaust Center has now, which is at Chatham University, and it's called Revolving Doors, it grapples with that. So it grapples with returning anti-Semitism like a revolving door. So, I mean, the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh took that very seriously, and many other museums have. So we weren't the only one, but others decided that it wasn't part of what they did.
In my opinion, I feel like it's kind of our mission to educate people about these things, bring awareness to it, and that's we have to hope that that's what's gonna. The education is what's going to prevent these things from happening. The awareness is going to is what's important. I think it is our mission. So,
well, I appreciate that, and I said this in the talk I just gave. But I mean, as I'm watching the news and I'm seeing like social media, because I like to look at social media too, and it's like misinformation. It's not, the sources are not vetted. It's like deep fakes and whatever else is going on in this information, and people are buying it, and people are not understanding that they are completely seduced and coerced by propaganda. That is something we really know about. I mean, we have a special knowledge from our knowledge of the Holocaust, because that worked in the Holocaust, right? It is a horrible example of how powerful propaganda is.
Thank you. And I'm actually going to steal this question from Alex Core, panelist chat here.
Yeah.
What can the world learn from the efforts in Pittsburgh to unite people, to unite all these communities together to fight anti-Semitism, specifically, regarding to the situation in Israel? How can we unite people to come together over this?
Well, so much of the coming together that happened here was based on relationships. So if you can't talk to someone, if you disagree with someone and you can't talk about that thing, it's very difficult. And I have spent the last 2.5 weeks trying to think about how do we break this down? Because people who are seduced by propaganda and have bought the dehumanization of Israelis and by extension of Jewish people, you only break that down by seeing each other as human and seeing the humanity in other people. And how do you create an environment to do that? I mean, you need leaders who will come together and will bring people who trust them into the conversation. So a lot of what really worked in Pittsburgh, I mean, one thing was that Squirrel Hill, the neighborhood where the Tree of Life Synagogue building is located, is a Jewish neighborhood. Once upon a time, it really was a Jewish neighborhood, like probably close to 100% Jewish. And now it's maybe 40%. It's one of the few urban Jewish neighborhoods in the country. But a lot of people have an attachment to Squirrel Hill. So when it happened there, it happened at a synagogue, but people drive past that synagogue all the time. People know that community. Maybe they went to school in that community. Maybe they have a friend, whatever it is. So it felt really personal to everyone in a way that had it happened somewhere else, it might not have. And it also just felt, it wasn't like the situation in Israel, which has a very strong us versus them component. You're for me or you're against me is pretty much how the language is happening, and how dare you. And a lot of language blaming Israel for this just horrific terror attack. And it's very hard. And I wish I had an answer for you. I really do, because I want to be able to break that down. I studied the history of the British Mandate in Palestine. I studied the history before Israel was created. So, and I know that if I try to give people history, they're not going to buy it. They're going to find something else that says something different. The power of social media and propaganda and misinformation especially is so great right now. I wish I had an easy answer. I wish I did, but I do feel like if you could get leaders to come together, I mean, if you have relationships, then you could talk about these things, but it really has just become it's so divisive now, and it pains me. And I knew it was happening. That's the last thing I'll say. It's not like I'm shocked that there's this divide now among people who once, shared a cause. I'm not surprised because I've seen it, but I didn't realize how pervasive and powerful it was going to be.
Yeah, I think a great starting point is to have these open and respectful conversations with one another, instead of judging others' opinions and judging others' perspectives. Let's try to understand those.
Not making assumptions, actually, active listening, we talk about a lot. And also to recognize, I mean, as I did at the beginning of this talk, that everybody is in pain. Everybody is in pain. They could respect that. Respect that people have just experienced terrible loss. And start there, start with humanity. Kindness. Start with kindness.
So we do have some questions from the audience here, and I'll start with what resources and organizations are tracking anti-Semitic attacks, and what do we need to be aware of, and how do we seek that information out?
Yeah, so I'll direct you to a couple of things. One is that the ADL is really keeping the best information right now. There is a place there's an organization, the Secure Communities Network, SCN, you all may have heard of. And through SCN, I'm sure you have a local SCN, you can report online. Anytime you see any kind of hateful activity, anti-Semitism is the reason that it was created. But any hate crime, any hate speech, anything like that you hear or see, you can report online. It's anonymous. So if you have any reluctance, you don't have to worry about that. And they are really good. And I was at the Holocaust Center at the time. I had a very strange voicemail, threatening voicemail. And I called the woman who does community security, and she had me call 911, and I went through the whole thing. And it's something. And we were doing police trainings at the Holocaust Center, and we did them before October 27th, 2018, and we did them after. And, part of the reason was that we knew these police recruits would be in communities where the people were not like them, and we needed them to be more open and more culturally sensitive. But we know that in the Jewish community, if you see something that's anti-Semitic, you may know it's anti-Semitic, but law enforcement might not. What's happened in the years since then is a much deeper understanding about, what constitutes a real threat. So ADL Secure Communities Network.
Yeah, Secure Community Network has been a great resource for candles, as well as our local Jewish community, for helping us get security grants to improve
wonderful
within our facilities, within our community. And we are continuing to work with them in order to improve those situations and make sure that we all stay on the same page.
Wonderful. Yeah, we have to. I wish we didn't, but we do.
Not a question, but I will note that Magda Brown's daughter, Rochelle, is here, and she has...
Rochelle is here. Rochelle!
She says, I feel honored to call you and Eva Core my friends, from Rochelle. So thank you, Rochelle, for your comment. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. And I love you. I loved your mother. You're the best.
And here we have another question. Do you have any recommendations for how we can approach how we can update our approach to Holocaust education to help educators navigate this diverse landscape and help connect historical events to current events? How do we make those connections?
Well, I have some ideas. I'm sort of workshopping a couple of different ideas. But just as after October 27th, 2018, I felt like we had really failed to tell a more complete story of the long history of anti-Semitism. I feel like even in Holocaust education, we have failed to express how utterly devastating that event was for the global Jewish community, and that the population of Jews in the world has still not reached the number of Jews who were in the world in 1933. And when there's a threat to Israel and to Jews all over the world, it is an existential threat. I don't feel like there is an understanding of, why are we teaching all of these people about the Holocaust, if not for them to understand how to recognize propaganda, misinformation, scapegoating, all of these things in our time, in their lifetimes. But also we need them to understand that we wouldn't be doing all of this if that hadn't been so horrific for Jews all over the world. And if the Nazis had succeeded, they were coming for Jews all over the world. I don't know that we have made those points strongly enough.
Thank you. And we have another question / comment here. Charlie says, perhaps I'm misreading, but I believe you mentioned history as less impactful than social media. Is it important to educate about history? And if so, how do we do so in a world of social media empowerment?
This is so hard. And talk about existential. My background is in history. I have a doctorate in history. I love it. I believe in it. But I know that attention span now is like 30 seconds or a meme. And I mean, you really need to get a devoted, dedicated audience if they're going to listen to very much about history. So does that mean you need to make history into sound bites? I don't know, maybe. But I mean, what's happening in the Middle East right now has a deep history that I feel most people are really unaware of. But yet everybody feels like an expert. So how do you answer that? I don't know, but what are people really paying attention to? Social media.
Yeah, I agree. And I think kind of my take on this is how do we make sure that what we're seeing on social media is accurate? As you pointed out earlier, I had misinformation about the Pittsburgh Synagogue shooting regarding Holocaust survivors, and I learn from my mistakes. I need to look into these things further, and at least that's my advice: is don't take everything you see for the truth. You need to do your own research and make sure that those things are true, what you are reading.
It's a perfect example, and I didn't mean to embarrass you or call you out, but we can see it. So I got a call like the day after from a journalist she was from one of the big three networks, and she said, "What about Rose?" And I said, "What about Rose?" And she said, "Well, she was a Holocaust survivor." I said, "She wasn't." But the rumor had already spread. Hello. Do we have our youngest attendee? Hi. So it's hard because media, like, they have to get clicks, they have to get views, everything. So they need to turn the information around really quickly. And that's how they allow falsehoods to enter into their reporting.
Thank you. Do we have any additional questions? If so, we do have a couple more minutes available here. We can take a few more questions.
I see a little in the chat. If you don't mind, my one comment that Magda came to candles many times, and I'm sure that you don't find very many people who didn't know and love her. She was a remarkable person. Okay, so what lessons were learned by the Tree of Life terrible events by law enforcement? Oh, to prevent a future tragedy. This is a really good question, and it gives me a chance to tell one of my stories from the program that we did on October 28th at Chatham University, where Magda spoke, and then she was on the cover of the Washington Post. In my introduction to that event, I thanked the first responders for running toward the gunfire. And the audience they erupted into applause, and everyone is crying. And so, I mean, the example of what happened here is of law enforcement, doing everything in their power to respond to what was happening. And since then, several things have happened. One is an organization like SCN. That organization was founded after the attack on the Tree of Life. The first responders to the Tree of Life did exactly the right thing. The police station is very close to the building. I mean, the perpetrator was not aware, I'm sure, that first responders would get there in moments, but that's what happened. And now, as we continue to do police training, the police training at the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, we went to the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. They have a very well-regarded 30 years of police training. That might not be the number, but close, called Law Enforcement and Society, which they do with the ADL. We went, a colleague of mine and I went and observed their training and talked to them about what we were doing. And they said, you have your own thing in Pittsburgh. So what started there to work with law enforcement has now become national. Yeah. Oh, good. I see all of these wonderful things are landing in the chat for where you report an incident. You all are so good. You all are so good.
I wanted to add on to what you were saying about law enforcement, and SCN again has a great resource here, and through the nonprofit security grant through the Department of Homeland Security, we have actually been working with local law enforcement agencies, bringing them onto committees within our board to help us develop security policies, have them come to our facilities and do facility tours so that they are aware of the layout of these buildings. They're aware of the threats and that are available or that are prevalent to us and the community that we're in. And so I think it has been really great to have these people come in and actually be involved with what we're doing and kind of see it on the ground, like what we're dealing with. And so I'm just fortunate that local law enforcement are happy to be involved with our policy.
That is really smart. I love that. I haven't heard of other organizations doing that, actually bringing law enforcement on to, I mean, we really knew the police. That's the other thing, is that the police who are responsible for the area, for Squirrel Hill and neighboring communities, we knew them because our Holocaust Center was there. So there was already a comfortable relationship that really just became closer. And it was really incredible what they did that day. Heroic.
I don't see any more comments or questions. So I think it'd be okay if we conclude just a couple of minutes early here. But my final remarks will be that this has been a great reflection. We did share the link to repairingtheworldfilm.org in the chat. You could also search that out on your own, repairingtheworldfilm.org. And that film is available to stream on PBS if you'd like to see it. I actually have the link pulled up in the background, and I'm going to watch it later. And as we mentioned, it's important for us to all be able to have these conversations and be aware about these things. And if our audience likes having these conversations, if you like the format that you're seeing here today, to bring awareness to these various topics, consider donating to Candles and supporting what we do so we can bring more speakers and have great programs that continue within our organization. And we're always hoping to reach more communities. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Dr. Bairnsfather, for being here. And the recording will be available on our website tomorrow.
Thank you so much. It really has meant so much to me to be with you all.
All right. Everyone have a great evening, and thank you for joining us. Goodbye.
Oh.